There are some times where you have to make sacrifices, where you have to do something you don't want to do, but it helps you leverage that experience that you may have in the past and grow further experience. I've had really great mentors in my days where they've pushed me along to do different certificates and trainings and speak at conferences and become published in different magazines. I push anyone to do that kind of training if they have any interest in doing that. It opens up a whole new facet of how you look at the production floor.
You're listening to Food Tech Talk, Supply Chain Insights from Farm to Fork, a podcast discussing the latest trends and technology in the food and supplement industries, featuring conversations with regulatory experts, quality and safety champions, and thought leaders across the industry. I'm your host, Lydia Adams. Let's jump right in. Welcome to today's episode of Food Tech Talk, Supply Chain Insights from Farm to Fork. Today, we're delighted to welcome Michael Ciepiela, a seasoned expert in food safety and quality assurance with extensive experience in the consumer packaged goods industry. Currently, Michael is the Director of Food Safety and Quality Assurance at the Spice Lab, where he focuses on driving a strong food safety culture and optimizing processes. With a background in Lean Six Sigma and a record of leading safety initiatives at companies like Taylor Farms and Kraft Heinz, Michael brings valuable insights into building robust food safety systems. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're excited to dive in today. And before we do, could you give us a little bit more about your background and really what initially drew you to a career in food safety and quality?
When I was in college and I got out of there was no real education on food safety. I went to school kind of close to Cornell University, which is a big food safety program there. However, there was never any guidance to say go into food safety. There was always just generic phlebotomist programs or research programs, whatever it may be. So at college, I applied for everything that said biology because I had a degree in biology. And I got hired by this company that tested confectionery products, which was like glazes, frostings, dips, that kind of stuff. And I realized that there's quite the career that could be launched with food safety initiatives here. Start off base level QA tech and then just started climbing the corporate ladder very quickly.
That's interesting. And obviously you worked at a lot of really prominent companies in the industry. What key lessons have you learned from these experiences that, shape your approach to food safety today?
So I think the biggest thing, and when I kind of hopped from not necessarily job to job, but grew my career from technician to coordinator, supervisor, manager, director, taking advantage of all those little opportunities. There are some times where you have to make sacrifices, where you have to do something you don't want to do, but it helps you leverage that experience that you may have in the past and grow further experience. So there's been situations where, I may not want to live in a certain area, but I could have a great job and great career here going forward if I sacrifice a little bit for this certain area, gain that experience, and then go forward and use that experience at other careers at different levels. I've also had really great mentors in my days where they've pushed me along to do different certificates and trainings and speak at conferences and become published in different magazines. The one mentor that I had really pushed me to do the Lean Six Sigma training, which I push anyone to do that kind of training if they have any interest in doing that. It opens up a whole new facet of how you look at the production floor.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is definitely a key. And I don't know how common it is, that people go through that because I know it's the whole process. But it seems like that's really helped you to kind of like build that approach, everywhere you've gone is the Six Sigma. We're going to talk today about food safety culture. And I know that really requires clear vision and leadership. How do you set that tone from the top to really instill that robust food safety culture across organizations that you've worked in?
So every organization is different, how you want to manage it. The one general consensus that I've learned from job to job is just being present. If you're on the shop floor with the employees, the line workers, and you're engaging with them and showing that you care and you want to take interest in what they're doing, and even asking about their personal lives and what they're up to, the likelihood of them following food safety protocols is a lot higher than not engaging with them at all. All of the employees walking around out here saying, "Hey, Mike, come take a look at this. Something may seem wrong here. And then getting them together in huddles. Everywhere from a small mom and pop company where you have like 60 some employees, or like at Kraft Heinz or Taylor Farms where you have thousands of employees, getting them grouped together and going over with, I saw this on the line today, maybe let's take a look at it, or hey, keep an eye on this by the line today, it could be a non-conformance in the future, that kind of stuff, and educating them as you go along as well.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people about this, and I think some of the things that get lost in the conversation is a lot of this is also general leadership, like what you just talked about really getting to that trust level, with people is where you're going to see things that need to be kind of addressed, right, within food safety. What have you found to be most effective after you've laid that groundwork of leadership in terms of just reinforcing the culture?
So I talked about educating. GFSI certifications require you to train all your employees on certain facets of the job, whether it be food safety, food defense, GMPs, allergens, etc. It's great when you can do it all at once because you block off a certain time, but employees don't retain that throughout the year. So reinforcing that throughout the year and then giving them that training over and over and over again, not to a point where they're like, oh, great, here comes Mike. He's going to give me training on allergen again and again and again. But training them on and using parts of your process out there that are applicable to the training. So if you have soy allergen on the line, you can say, hey, we're going to learn about soy allergen and go to that specific line that's running that. So then they understand and they're physically touching the training. The more that they can get involved and the more comprehensive it may be while they're in the middle of it is better for them.
Yeah, and I think it's also about kind of each level, right? So, how do you address these, how do you address food safety culture really from the floor up to the management? And how do you change your approach based on where somebody is in the process?
I mean, the way that I look at food safety is it's not linear. It's not just checking a box saying we meet food safety compliance. There's multiple programs and facets of the operation that go into food safety. I like to think one is the most centric is GMP adherence. Standing by the hand wash station. Are employees coming in and are they washing their hands? Are they putting on the proper PPE? Are they going from a non-allergen line to an allergen line and back to the non-allergen line? So it's just watching the day-to-day operations and making sure that employees are following those practices that you have in place. GFSI schemes do a really good job with kind of driving this. It's hard when they come in and they say, hey, are you meeting food safety culture? Because it's not just one thing, it's multiple things going into, yes, we're meeting it. I've had employees in the past that have worked for me that have done surveys. Does it meet food safety culture? But that kind of stuff just turns into a data collection sort of thing. Are you using the survey for value add corrections after it, or is it just data to collect data? So you have to have actionable progression going forward for value add things for food safety wise.
Yeah, and I think that employee engagement can also be a key. Can you maybe share an example where an increased amount of employee engagement has really made significant improvements within food safety in your career?
Oh yeah. So I would say, just like I mentioned earlier, being on the line, it helps with getting employees together in huddles, especially if you have an audit coming up or an organic audit coming up. We'll go over what an auditor will look for. And not just specifically like you need to do this because the auditor said so. It's more or less, like I said, the educational background behind it. And then as you keep reiterating that kind of training, they'll keep bringing stuff to you if they see something wrong. I would say just being on the shop floor and making sure that you're constantly driving the food safety culture. It's not just one person driving it, it's the whole company driving it.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think, getting every department involved, can also be an important part of it, which requires a lot of internal communication and, coordination. How have you really done that in the past in terms of working with additional departments and making sure everybody's on the same page?
So SQF has you drive monthly meetings for HACCP updates, KPI metrics. So typically, cross-departmental collaboration will be a part of those meetings. That's where it starts. Uh, Having production on your side is obviously a big deal, because when an auditor comes in, they're looking for quality and production compliance for food safety culture. They're not going to the county department saying you guys meeting food safety culture necessarily. But if they're getting that motive or that idea that production and quality are working hand in hand, everyone's doing their checks, whether it's receiving and shipping, going out for labeling checks and food identification, having that constant communication certainly helps. Like I said, you don't want to overdrive it, but you want to make sure that people are following the adherence to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think with anything, especially involving change management, sometimes there's resistance. So, what approaches have you taken in the past to just overcome resistance, ensure buy-in from various departments, and just, make sure that, you've kind of addressed any confusions or lack of communication during those situations?
I would say just giving the general importance as to why we're doing our jobs. People like to be reminded why their job's important and what we do it for every single day. I come in and I look at FDA recalls and USDA recalls every day and say, hey, here's what we're preventing. These are the kind of things that when you're talking to an employee on the floor, the jar dropped. Do I put it back online? Do I throw it out? Well, you throw it out because it could be affected by X, Y, Z. Giving that real-time education and training certainly helps with driving that. For overcoming resistance, we're all on the same team essentially. That's the real buy-in you want to get from everyone from the top down, where you're here to make sure that you're producing safe quality product.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about training. So, how do you design and implement training programs that keep employees knowledgeable, keep them motivated, and that are continuously effective?
So every place is different for training. There are times where you can bring a group of people in and give them the flat out training, and they'll comprehend it and they'll be able to spit it out for you months down the road. And there are other times where you have to constantly do reminder training. I found what works best is the huddles, small group huddles throughout the entire year, educating on bits and pieces, like not giving them the entire training all at once, but just what's pertinent to them at the moment. And then, hey, do you remember what we talked about last week? Okay, well, here's this new training this week.
So speaking of training, how do you design and implement a training program that really keeps employees knowledgeable and motivated about food safety?
So I'd say this is probably the hardest part about training, especially the motivated part, because employees don't really want to be sitting there listening to me talk for 3, 4, 5 hours long all day. They want to be engaged with what's going on. So what I've done in the past is I've used site-specific examples. So if we're doing allergen training, I'll do whatever allergens we have on site. If we do food defense training, I'll pull up a map of our entire facility and say, here are risk areas, here's how we mitigate them. Here's your role in this specific kind of training as well. I think that's the most pertinent part of it, is giving them what's your role in all of this? Why am I here? Why does this apply to me? Giving them all that information, saying like, oh, this is why it's important. Or by you doing this and following GMPs, you could eventually prevent deaths from somewhere else. So that's why we put these kind of things in place where, you want to give them the severity and the consequences of what could happen, but all the things that we have in place to prevent it from happening.
Absolutely. And, speaking of the effectiveness, how do you measure that, and how do you ensure that these strategies are working?
So we talked about like quantifiable data being translated from qualifiable data. It's using all of your programs that you have in place, whether it's your KPI metrics, measuring customer complaints, or micro swabs, or GMP violations or internal audits. You're using that data to see if it is translating, if the training is translating. Internal audits such as like GMP audits are like yes, no box checks. But if you're sending out product and you're receiving back a lot of customer complaints, there's probably something that's leading to those customer complaints. On the flip side of things, if you're not seeing customer complaints, the likelihood of the effectiveness of the training is probably working.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about Lean Six Sigma. How do the principles help you to really identify and implement ongoing improvements within your food safety process?
So the two biggest things that I use are value stream mapping and spaghetti diagrams. Um, I'll tell anyone if I'm just standing on the shop floor, you see me standing out there just looking, I'm not just dozing off into the sunset here. Like there's reasons why I'm standing there watching the process go through. Um, and you could utilize this everywhere from receiving in the product to shipping out the finished product. Um, where you're measuring the individual process steps of how long it takes, what resources are needed, how many employees are needed, and then where that product is going to. So if you have a high risk product like produce, especially at Taylor Farms where we used it there, we had multi-facility buildings that required moving it from one facility to the next one for a high risk product. So you had to keep it refrigerated, you had to move it quickly, you had to store it properly. And then it would go from an FDA building to a USDA building. So there was the added regulatory requirements there. So if you can map your entire process and understand where all your risks are with how the employees manage their GMPs throughout that entire process, you end up mitigating any sort of risk that could be there, or at least putting processes in place that control that risk.
Yeah, that's really cool. And at the beginning, you really mentioned that Lean Six Sigma was, a big part of how you approach, your work. What other advice do you have for other food safety and quality assurance professionals as to like how they can go about, learning this, getting the certification, and why they should?
My mentor led me down this path where getting the Six Sigma belt. I started with the black belt and then went to a master black belt. It just helps you see processes entirely different. It's like climbing the certification steps from SQF level 1, 2, 3. There's added responsibility, but with the added responsibility, there's more experience. And you can help identify where a risk could happen, whether it be associated with employees coming in or raw materials being incorrect or the storage of things. It touches on all facets of the operation.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about technology. Obviously, this is Food Tech Talk, so we like to kind of say, how does this intersect with the technology that's out there? So, for you in your past and your present experience, how has that played a part in supporting a robust food safety culture? And really, how do you integrate technology and process together?
So not up until recently, we were using just paper processes where you turn in a packet of paper that's that thick and you have to review it all by the end of the day. And it just wasn't very time value add. Whereas now we're using a software called QAD Red Zone, which is real-time data, gives you all the information, and every individual line worker or line lead has a tablet on their line. So at any point in time, I could see what's going on in that line. Even from like where I'm sitting right now, I'm getting warnings on my phone saying, you need to come out to the line here. But you can see if there's a downtime, how fast the equipment's running, if the weight checks are in compliance. That really has come leaps and bounds. We use it at Taylor Farms as well. And it helps with not only the production side of things, but the quality compliance side of things. So it'll speed up any sort of mock traceability that you have to perform. And it's easily searchable. You're not going and digging through filing cabinets looking for packets of paperwork for a specific lot code that you ran 3-4 years ago. You're just typing into the search bar where this product went to, and then it'll pull up all the information for you of where that specific raw material went into. So it really cuts down on time because, when it comes to recalls, the faster you get it done, the better.
What other benefits have you guys seen from taking that leap?
Just the real-time data has been phenomenal. Having the confidence for the line workers on the shop floor where they can go in there and enter in any type of data they want. within constraints, obviously. But if they're having issues on the floor, they can page maintenance on there. If they're having quality issues on the floor, they could page me or my team out there to come take a look. And then we utilize it from a quality software standpoint for all of our internal audits, whether it be GMP audits or fire extinguisher audits, or we'll do metal detector checks on there. So we'll use our CCP compliance on there. It's really all encompassing. The only thing it's not an inventory system, which it would be nice to have that integrated into it, where you can track how much raw material usage you're using, whether it be packaging or the ingredient itself. But overall, it just cuts down in time on everything.
So, whether this is technology or something else, as you look ahead, in the food industry and food safety, what trends do you really see, in the next 5 to 10 years that are going to make a huge difference?
So the easiest answer is AI, right? How can we integrate AI into food manufacturing? The one thing so I'm a big Chat GPT guy. I'll praise everyone for using that and all the integrated AI formats. But the one thing I've noticed is you have to know what to tell AI. It's not sophisticated to the point yet where you can just type in, give me a food safety plan. Where myself and my employees have gone and challenged it, say, where I have them writing an SOP for a approved supplier program. Go and write me an approved supplier program, and it spits out XYZ, and then we compare it to what we have on site against our SQF certification requirements, and it's nowhere near what it needs to be. So it's still a good tool. But you need to still have that past experience and that hands-on experience really to integrate it into your day-to-day operations.
Yeah, totally agree with that. It's amazing what we're seeing, it can do, and there's just so much in the future, but it's still learning. We have to train the AI to understand what we want as the output. So yeah, that's a really good point.
The one thing that I did notice is we use it for a lot of, like, write me a letter of guarantee. You give me information on Prop 65 statements. Give me information on PFAS statements, that kind of stuff. But if you take that information and tailor it to your business, it's very beneficial to us here, at least.
And so kind of some final overarching questions for you. What do you think, amongst all these things we've talked about, what is really the most critical element in sustaining a strong food safety culture over the long term?
I'd say just constantly reiterating it, especially to the up and coming generations. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't have a strong food safety background until I got in the thick of it. I think with social media nowadays and just the news, it's gaining a lot more traction for attention wise. Where people are demanding, what's in the ingredients, what's in my product, what am I eating, is the grocery stores holding it at the right temperature. So keep being inquisitive, really. Keep questioning and challenging, myself and other professionals out there to make sure that we're adhering to food safety compliances. And then continuous improvement side of things, pushing the envelope to make sure that we're constantly improving and that we're not just complacent when it comes to food safety.
Yeah, and that's a really good point about consumer-led, demands right now, because I do think that as it becomes more publicized and, people are really paying attention to this, it's not just, the compliance, right? It's what are we doing for our brand? What are we doing for, our business goals overall? And food safety is a huge part of that now. Obviously, as someone who's successfully navigated a lot of challenges in food safety, which will always come up, what do you want your legacy to be within this industry, and how are you working towards that today?
I would say my goal is to keep giving back. I had really good mentors that pushed me along and led me in the right direction. And they had me speaking at conferences at 30 years old, which is kind of early on from what I've noticed as I go to these conferences. But it's just challenging other employees or challenging the up and coming generation to keep getting into the industry. I don't think there's enough attention, at least from when I was first starting. But as I go to these conferences and I see younger people coming, going and networking with them, making them feel comfortable that, there's a lot more out there than just being a QA technician, if that's what you want, obviously. But there's so much growth opportunity out there for anyone and across the globe too, because these ingredients are coming in from everywhere and there's manufacturing sites everywhere and companies are always popping up. So I guess for an overall legacy to just keep pushing continuous improvement for food safety purposes and making sure we're producing safe quality product.
I love it. Any final thoughts for our audience before we log off?
No, I don't think so. I think that's all I had.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mike. This has been really a great conversation, important conversation, and I really appreciate your time today.
All right. Thank you.
And thanks to our listeners. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us for another bite-sized nugget of food tech talk, supply chain insights from farm to fork. To learn more about Trustwell and its technology platform that connects product formulation, nutrition analysis, and compliant labeling with traceability, recall readiness, and supply chain transparency, please visit www.trustwell.com. Thanks for listening.